We're here today to talk about what ranked, well, depending on how we're looking at the poll results, really ranked right up there in the top three in terms of the concern around sales collateral. So as you know, this series is all focused on that bridging the gap, the great gap and the enduring gap between sales and marketing. That the effectiveness of those two teams really depend on each other. And we've been segmenting the topics, and today we're here to focus specifically in on sales collateral. And when we say sales collateral, we're really talking about a few different things. And it's an interesting starting point in terms of, I think even there we have two different perspectives, and we're going to hit a little bit of counterpoint on it. But the toughest piece about having great sales collateral is that it really is a team play. It's not an individual play. An individual salesperson, of course, can go off and sometimes will come up with their own deck or their own case study or their own little article that they're going to draw on. Where we are more effective is when sales and marketing are working really shoulder to shoulder in lockstep to have collateral that is useful to the buyer, and I'll get into that a little bit more in terms of from a sales perspective. So yeah, Brendan, any comments that you want to lead off with? And I thought we could dive into first in terms of what do we mean when we say sales collateral? What are those different categories?
Yeah, I totally agree with you, and I think an important point that you alluded to there was that there's definitely different types of collateral, there's different types of content, and I think some marketing organizations probably focus a lot on, we'll call it marketing collateral or marketing content for simplicity here. Quite often it's around brand or demand gen, and they kind of forget the specific sales collateral pieces, or just have this broad assumption that, well, whatever we produce for that, sales will use as well, right? So I think I'm really interested in this topic because, focusing on the sales collateral side of this will really, I think, have marketers rethink some of what they've been doing, what they've been missing. And, I'll probably have some resets here myself as well, right? Because I probably fall into that same trap on occasion too, where I'm, thinking, oh, I built a white paper, sales can just use it. Well, maybe, but not always. What are the other pieces that I may not use at all in my campaign that sales desperately needs? I mean, I think everyone looks at the presentation as that piece, but it's a lot more than that. So looking forward to kind of dissecting some of this with you.
So I'm going to dig into that in terms of, rather than defining sales collateral by, is it, what is it, a white paper or whatever else? I'm going to define it in terms of what gets used at different stages of the sales or customer care process. So right away, right off the top, I'm going to segment it into 4 buckets. And what we're not talking about today is internal sales collateral. We're really focused on today in our conversation, externally facing sales collateral. So at the awareness stage, when we're trying to get interest and do lead generation and build momentum with new customers or lapsed customers, that's to really attract them when we're talking about things like blog posts and infographics and white papers. So that falls into, I'd say, category number 1. Then when we have a buyer interested and engaged in a conversation, they're in the consideration phase. They're considering whether to buy from us, and we're really working to inform them on what's available from us, but also to educate them on how to buy our services like ours. And that's things like case studies and ebooks and webinars as well can be very, very useful at that step in the process. The third is, of course, now we've got the customer interested in making a decision on, us versus a competitor, or us versus most often indecision, no decision. And at that stage, we're working them to convince them to move forward. And we've got things on product in terms of brochures, but also comparison sheets, ROI calculators, things of that nature. And then the last thing is after they buy from us. So post-purchase, we want to support and engage the customer in the product. We need them using the product. We need them totally immersed in the product. So those are things like user guides and onboarding materials and stories as well. Can be very, very helpful at that point, where we've had great customer success stories along the way that we could be sharing with them. So let me pause there, Brendan, in terms of that is like the sales lens of like, I think
Yeah.
of it as my job is just, it's not to close them overnight. It's move them stage to stage to stage. And I have different needs for collateral at each of those stages, and they have a really different purpose. But yeah, how do you look at that world from a marketing perspective?
So, I mean, at the very simplistic level, if we want to end this at 3 minutes or whatever, at 5 minutes, I agree.
Okay.
But we've got
Yeah.
20 minutes to fill.
Or
But no,
and.
so I'm fully on board with you on the stages, right? Like, so that part makes all the sense
Okay.
in the world to me. Different content at different stages, also fully agree with you. I think an interesting point as you were walking through these, I just dawned on me, and it goes to the session we recorded on the leads and the funnel and stuff like that.
Sure.
You and I probably don't define the stages the same way,
Yes.
which, would be bad if we were in the same organization
Yeah.
and break some of our lead funnel and messaging stuff. So obviously a first takeaway for me on this one is, if sales and marketing are defining stages, obviously you need to align, and it may not be, just the funnel stages. It could be the journey stages, which is what, I think you're alluding to there. And I mean, they're in some ways there's 6 of one and half a dozen of the other, but they are different perspectives, and I use both as well. Absolutely. I think, yeah, where I look at things slightly differently, I noticed you had the ebook in consideration and some of the webinars in consideration. I quite often do those a bit earlier, so I may use those on the awareness stage. Now, we could, in some ways, we're splitting hairs here, because I would tell every client that, the data will tell us which fits better where. So, we're doing that. I also tend to sometimes make the white papers a bit later, because some of them tend to be deeper and more technical, but obviously depends on the topic as well. I think the one that surprised me the most was I probably used the case studies more often earlier. I do really think they're very important in that credibility stage, which I think I call it conversion, and you called it something slightly different. But yeah, I think the case studies was one that, someone's going to want to know they're not the first to do this. They're not alone doing this, that someone else has had success. So, I definitely see them as a part there. But yeah, I think it's nuances in the end is what I'm getting at. And, clearly if we were at the same company and trying to align our sales and marketing one, you'd want to make sure that we're doing those together. Some of my perspectives also built around the campaign side of it too. So when are we getting awareness, or the brand side, when are we getting the thought leadership engine going? You don't really want to gate that. And then when you start gating and generating leads, that tends to be a bit deeper in the cycle, in the journey, right? Because you got to get their attention first before they engage.
Yeah. Yeah. I really do like what you're saying in terms of, hey, like from a blocking and tackling sales perspective, it's like whatever is useful to the buyer in that moment, really.
Yeah.
Like, so I appreciate your piece about let the numbers tell us. So I'm going to jump us for, so we've got some basic definition in terms of at least scope in, scope out. What are we talking about here when we say collateral? I think from a sales perspective, what makes great sales collateral? Well, my job as a salesperson is really to make it easy to buy from me at the end of the day. And so whatever helps the buyer do that, or the champion, or the economic decision maker, or whoever that happens to be, to make it as easy as possible to buy from me. So I think of sales collateral in terms of, it's got to be, really relevant. So it has to be something that it is not mired in a whole bunch of meaningless language, but it's really at the end of the day easy to easy to bring in and be relevant to my purchase decision. It has to be easy to consume as well. So I don't know of many buyers that actually read the really long case studies. It's like those, some of those got pretty meaty in the past, and I think we have to make things as easy as possible to consume, and then we have to have collateral that helps the buyer make their decision, like to really, and then I think does create some sensitivity of us to really know what are the risks that they face in making the decision. There's, I think I've talked about it in the past, but some great study on how difficult it is as a buyer. It's actually really tough to make the decision because there's a lot of risk, there's a lot of costs, there's a lot of implication in terms of both my role in the company as a buyer, but also what money is at on stake and how it's going to impact some of my coworkers if I make the wrong decision. And part of, I think, the risk of Collateral is to help them to decide by helping to de-risk the decision, help them to really guide them on, supporting them in that decision-making process.
Yeah, I think, again, the short answer to what you just said is I totally agree, right? I think you hit a lot of important points. The one I wanted to kind of drill down on from my perspective that I think a lot of marketers don't always consider, myself included, I'm sure at times too, is, giving the buyers the information they need to make the buying decision simple, right? I'm paraphrasing obviously what you said there, but I do think marketers tend to create content. There's obviously some pieces I think that they do think that way, but there's also a lot of other ones where it's more attention grabbing, maybe more controversial, maybe more, I'll say, creative, fun, some of those words that based on what you just said, those are probably maybe better on the website homepage to get attention, less useful to the sales side. But marketers just, I don't have time to create 2 pieces or 20 pieces or whatever the number is. So they just hope one will do the trick. But yeah, I definitely, what you've outlined there is a really good way, I believe, for marketers to think and see the difference, right? Like, so it's not that there's no need for some of those other pieces that I was mentioning, the thought leadership, the story, the, I'll say creative, but the brand video, maybe that type of stuff, like that's still valuable and important. But yeah, what I'm hearing from you, and it's making me think, is that, marketing can still do those pieces, but don't call them sales collateral. Sales needs something a bit different, right? I don't think you're against those pieces. You're just, we will use them less. Marketing will use them for something totally different.
Yeah, totally. I think the fail point that we face is, I'm going to say it from a sales perspective and a marketing perspective. I think that the fail point from the sales perspective is that moving real fast and actually not articulating what we need.
Yeah.
And got another deal. I'm not picking up the pattern that this is the 4th time that I'm using this, I don't know, like PDF that I came up with on the fly for the customer 4 customers ago, and not articulating that need clearly to say, wow, buyers actually need this, or I believe I'm going to be using this ongoing in my sales process. So I do think that needs articulation, bringing it together, really being succinct and clear and decisive in terms of the direction, and back to marketing in terms of if marketing's going to be supporting me on pulling this together to make sure this material is consistent, it's on brand, it really hits the mark in terms of overall corporate messaging and is mirrored back on the website, then I better be able to say, what's the format? What's the actual content I care about? What's the length that I care about? So I think that is a primary fail point on the sales side. On the marketing side, I think it's, as you were kind of alluding to, Brendan, it's I got this thing, like I've got a nail. What am I going to hit? Like, what am I going to nail to the wall with that? Because I've got it. Like, it has to come from the perspective, I think, in terms of when we're creating material, is what are we solving for the buyer at the end of the day, or what are we solving for the salesperson with the buyer in order to make a difference in that sales process?
Yeah, and we do. I do an interesting, like when I run I'll call it a content strategy workshop. It's often done in context of other things as well. I found this highly effective, and I think it would work really well for some of what you're saying here. And I just haven't maybe expanded it as broadly as I should. But like when I build my marketing strategies and content strategies, I do use the journey, right? And that we need different things. We need different content. We do different media. If we do a session on campaigns, I think we could touch on that a bit more. But one of the key things I really like with how this framework I've been using is we try and identify the key questions the buyers will have at each stage, sorry, and then build the content piece to answer that, right? So, in theory, one content piece may answer more than one question. I get that, but the one-to-one mapping is nice. If the buyer's like, I'll use my question from just earlier, right? You're at the stage of the journey, regardless of where we place it at this point, is, who else has done this and what results do they get? That's a really good question. Almost every buyer will have it. What's the piece that's going to deliver on that, right? It's not a fancy high-level ebook that's got a lot of fancy graphics, right? It's a case study with numbers.
Yeah.
That's really what they're looking for,
Yeah.
quotes, named customers. I mean, there's other attributes to that as well, but I really find that, when you map out those questions, and, the risk is you end up with 5,000 questions and no way to produce it. But if you really map out all the questions and prioritize them, you can build some very pointed pieces of content. And I think it would really address what you're saying from a sales perspective, which is, what is the buyer's problem we're solving for? I'm just saying, what is the buyer's question we're answering? But I think it's going to get us the same spot.
Yeah. God, I think it's also like it's both at the front end of the work and the back end. So I think what you're talking about is really, hey, let's sit down and as a sales and marketing team actually map out those questions. I like that way of framing, and I think that can work. I think it's remembering as well that just because marketing's got it really on point doesn't mean sales knows how to use it. So there has to be, my business is all about enablement for a reason, because sales teams need that support to, role play it. Like, everybody hates role play, and it's the best tool possible. It's like, let's role play how we use that in an actual customer conversation. I think the third piece too is that I don't see enough teams iterating. We're moving really fast, both marketing side and sales side. Absolutely, there is huge pressure on produce. You've got a long backlog of stuff, and we're throwing something like a case study over the fence, or let's say it's a good white paper, or the latest sales pitch deck as well for this particular segment that we're trying to penetrate. You're going to have to iterate it. It's not just one and done. And in fact, the iteration doesn't just happen with one salesperson looked at it and gave some feedback and marked it up or made some changes on it. It's going to be after, 5 or 10 or 20 or 30 sales presentations, conversations with buyers before we really know, wow, we're really off the mark. This is good, but it needs a couple tweaks, or wow, we hit it out of the park. This is awesome.
Yeah. And there's definitely that, I'll call it anecdotal, but maybe more formalized is what you're proposing, that from a feedback loop mechanism. But there's also the data that I alluded to early on, right? It's shocking the number of content plans that are measured by the number of completed pieces, not by the number of engagements. And by engagements, I'm just generalizing, could be video views, could be downloads, could be, time on page. There's a number of different ways to measure that. But, there's a lot of, I produced 10 pieces of content this month.
Yeah.
Versus I produced one piece of content that was read by 100 people, of which 50 became buyers, right? Radically different perspectives on that. Yeah. But not many people do that second example. A, they don't track it. B, they don't set those goals, etc. And I mean, that to me is critical, regardless of the type of collateral we're talking about, to be honest, but is obviously important to the sales side of thing too. And, again, I like what I'm hearing again, which has become a theme throughout a lot of these is, feedback from both sides, to be honest, but feedback from the sales organization to what marketing's created, and just involvement in terms of planning and approvals and stuff like that along the way, right? I think we had those on our list from the messaging talk. Right. We have them again, but and everyone would be like, yeah, obviously. But then I challenge people watching, how many of those actually have that at their organization? Some do. There's no doubt about it in my mind. Some do, but there's also a lot that don't.
Yeah. So if we leave this, Brendan, this topic in terms of just if I could ask you, what's the one thing on behalf, let's say you're representing all marketing teams in the world.
Pour them. Pour them.
For them. For them. What's the one thing you really want from sales that you guys typically don't get, or that you don't see happening on a sales side that would really help to power this up for you?
I think it's, I mean, I'm going to pick feedback as the
Okay.
general topic, but for me, it's a bit more precise than that, because it's, I use this piece of content with this customer or group of customers or in this context or whatever. And, this happened. They asked me for more info on topic A, or they threw it back at me because they thought it was too much spin, or whatever it might be. But like very specific feedback about how it was used, how the customers reacted, and that type of stuff. Because, we just talked about it. In a lot of places, there's no feedback. In other cases, there's feedback, but the feedback tends to be, the diagram layout or the logo placement and stuff like that, or some of the words being used. And I'm not saying that feedback's not helpful. It is helpful, but I really want to get down that level. And it's like, this piece did this or didn't do this for these reasons, right? Because again, like we talked about in our other sessions, marketing's not creating the content for fun. Maybe some people are, but they want it to have an impact. They want it to help move people along the funnel, get more leads, help drive or close revenue, etc. And without that, really more concrete things. Yeah, I would do feedback. And to wrap up, I'll turn the question over to you now. So from a marketing perspective, what's the one thing you want?
I wanted to start with the end in mind. If they're like, really don't start with, we're writing a white paper. Start with, we're trying to solve for this problem in the buy process that you guys face and we all face. And because I think that is way more of a powerful rally call of sales, to say, hey guys, you get so many deals stuck after they do the qualification demo, and we're not tipping them over to the balance in terms of proposal and actually, consideration. And we're breaking that down, and we're starting from there, not starting from, hey, we got a cool idea for a new piece of collateral. And I don't mean that I don't mean it from a flippant perspective that that it's thoughtless or anything like that. It will be the rally call that will get sales attention, get the feedback that you're looking. If we're actually solving for a problem that is really, really tough and expensive for the business, because as a salesperson, I'm losing deals. You'll have you should, with good salespeople on the other side, you'll have their attention.
Yeah. So I like what you're doing. And to me, that's, the joint planning that we've alluded to, not only in this session, but in previous sessions too. Right. And I'm 100% with you. I mean, within this context, totally makes sense. But yeah, it's, content strategies and plans should not be 2 white papers, 3 blogs, 5 presentations, right? It should be in your example, what problems are there and how are we helping the customer solve it? Let's explain it. Or as I was proposing earlier, what questions do they have and how do we answer them? I think those are both getting us to the same place eventually. And yeah, the format and some of the other things come second. It's not that they're not needed and not a discussion, but they're the second part, not the first part.
Yeah. Great.
All right, cool. So once again, everyone, thanks for watching. Brendan Ziolo from Zinc Marketing here.
And Peter Meyers from Portage Sales. And had a blast talking with you all about this today, and look forward to our next conversation.
All right. See ya.
See you.